From out of the lab and into the gym, it's the Coach Me Plus Applied Sports Science Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Applied Sports Science Podcast. In episode 5, Kevin sits down with one of the most influential voices in the sports science world, Carl Valle, who is the Director of Innovation for InsideTracker. You can follow Carl on Twitter at SpikesOnly. A wide variety of topics touched on in this episode. One of the main themes is the approach to working closely with coaches and athletes on a sports science approach. Remember, you can listen to every episode on iTunes or at CoachMePlus.com. Now, to Kevin and Carl.
So, welcome to Coach Me Plus Podcast, the Applied Sports Science Podcast number 5. We're here with Carl Valle, who over at the Central Virginia Sports Performance Summit. We're going to have some people coming in and out, of course, while we're doing this. We also have Ethan Owens in the room, former Catapult, now Coach Me Plus employee, and
Derek Hansen, one of the speakers at the Central Virginia seminar.
Yeah, no, this is gonna be great. And you know what? Honestly, like the way when we started this podcast, I was like, I want to go as low on the format as possible, so that we're not like really sticking to something. So actually having guys kind of creep in here might actually work out for us.
Oh, good.
So they might steal your sunshine from you.
Hey, that's fine.
It might not be 10 minutes though.
As long as it's funny and at least entertaining during the commutes that some of these coaches have to deal with.
And that's the feedback that we got, is that some of these guys actually listen to this stuff like while they're on their treadmill and while they're running around, and they're driving into the office and they got those long commutes, so they're doing it that way. And
good.
Hey, if we're making it easy on people, we'll make it easy on people. So this is the first podcast that we actually did a little bit of prep for.
Good.
And Carl, you basically reach out to people to ask questions ahead of time, right?
Yeah, the questions, some of them are very specific to their situation, and they're like 500 words, and it's like, okay, you're dealing with an individual athlete, an individual problem.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's nice to get like little case studies, but what you want to do is have something more universal, more systemic, that you can help more coaches that are in the same situation. And there's a lot of things that you can learn from just having very good bread and butter questions.
Got it. So we do have some questions that you put here in front of me, and I think it's gonna be good to kind of shape the conversation. But I also want to keep it a little bit natural. I mean, we just got out of a really good couple of seminars, or a couple of speaking engagements here at the conference, and the energy is still kind of
there's a good vibe
high, right? Yeah. So the last one, there's a lot of feedback and a lot of live questions coming back about how you're getting athletes to actually comply with monitoring, and how you're getting athletes to actually do things in an environment that's constantly flowing and constantly changing. What would you say your biggest question that maybe wasn't answered in that would have been?
I think we're talking about Randy Ballard's presentation, and what was great about Randy is, and I've known him for years, is that we're cut from the same cloth. Mm-hmm. Some of the same mentors that have influenced him are the people that were my USA Track and Field Level 3 instructors, or Level 2, and so I really find that there's a lot of similarities of what Randy comes into conclusions. But obviously coming from a medical perspective, even though he has an influence from coaches, I think one of the things that was a little bit puzzling, and that's why there were questions, is how to get it done.
Yep.
And I felt like a lot of coaches were really impressed, really excited, but left a little overwhelmed, saying, how do I get this done?
Yep.
And anytime I see any type of presentation, I always ask, are those screenshots or are they representations of someone's philosophy? My presentation, since I'm going to be doing something at 8 a.m. is going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to change my presentation based upon, obviously, what Randy's projecting, but I am going to also build upon that. And the ability to ad-lib will make things resonate with coaches, because I said, hey, I'm in the same boat you are. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that was a little bit of an enigma is, all right, show me you're telling me this stuff, but show me. Do a demo. Okay, go right now. To find an athlete, look him up, and saying, what's the, whether it be a different term of the KPI, because obviously there's a difference between limitations and things like that, but like, show me what that looks like. You wake up, open up your laptop, you're not having a conversation with 500 student athletes at once. And that was one, I think, the things on Twitter.
One of the guys asked, he said, I'm one coach, I got 500 athletes, how do I do this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and then I think about a week ago, and I was tweeting at you or tweeting at someone, was talking about, hey, the best way to relate to an athlete is to talk to them. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at I hear that every single year. I don't get upset about it. I know the people's intentions. I do that. The first thing I do is I text some of the athletes I work with.
But you work with much smaller groups.
I work with a tiny group. And I always say to people, don't do what I do. Because first of all, the amount of hours I put in is not realistic to individual athletes. As a guy that has an art background, I treat people like a sculpture. And you don't have scaled Michelangelo. Even he might have had some people help him out when he was doing his work. But the whole idea is like, here's what I do, and you're a super coach, and you work with 3 or 4 athletes, and that's great in Olympic sport, but that's not what the average high school strength coach deals with.
So this is like a recurring theme that we see over and over again, where what you do as a consultant, you get to scratch the surface or scratch the latest stuff, and you get to do it in a way because you're working with a 1 to 5 kind of, or maybe a 1 to 10, or even 1 to 1, where you're working directly with people. And in the NBA, we see similar coach to athlete ratios, which is why the NBA, I think, pretty easily adopts new technology, because you have this 1-for-1 type of relationship. Now you take it into let's go really way over the top and go to research, where you have guys in lab coats doing all the research and looking at populations, and they have the staff to be able to manage it. Now that works in your setting. That works in the setting where you have a low ratio of coach to athlete like the NBA, and it works well in a setting where you have researchers doing it. Now we get into the applied setting, and now we have 2 coaches, 500 kids, 1 coach, 300 kids. That breaks down, right?
Yeah, the rules change when the rubber hits the road, and you don't, and also if you look at a high school, the average coach, unless you're like the big powerhouse football programs in the South, you're probably dealing with someone that is very part-time. So when you hear all these discussions of like, okay, this is what I'm doing for, quote, monitoring or getting data, I always say, okay, that's great, but is that going to work for someone that is maybe the guy's a blue-collar person that's coming off and he's doing a double shift? Yep. Is he going to go and say, okay, I'm going to wake up at, God knows when, to go and manually take data from an Excel spreadsheet that was sent from an athlete? It's not going to happen.
Sure.
So when things do break down, that's when I begin. Everything sounds great on paper. That's why I always like to say, show it to me. Open up your laptop and let's see it. And as soon as you say it can't be done for a larger group, that's when I said that's your problem. Not necessarily scaling it, but you didn't get more depth with a smaller population. So a lot of coaches think, well, I need to get a questionnaire in. What can I do? Low-hanging fruit topics. I hate it. So that my job is to take maybe of N of 1, which was an example by both Bob and Randy, and go deeper. And once you go deeper, then you know what is good and what's not useful. So I like width, depth, and then getting the information immediately so you can actually use it. And my concern is that, and I had in the hallway, as soon as I left, you saw that high school coach, hey, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And so I think that what people need to know is, and respect someone else's calendar. What are your available times to do your job? Someone in college, that is their job.
Yeah.
Someone in high school, which is 30,000 high schools, you need someone to be able to do something for 15 minutes a day, tops. Otherwise, it's just not going to be done. The same rules apply for coaches as that do for athletes. If an athlete says this is going to take me 18 minutes to do, they won't do that.
Yep.
a coach is also going to say, if I have an athlete taking 18 minutes to do, I don't have 18 minutes times whatever amount of athletes they work with. So that's why, as a technology and a sports technologist, I look at scaling things. You've got to be able to see, is this liquid and can this move very quickly? And it doesn't have these typical barriers. Import-exporting is my biggest pet peeve. And it's tough because, I feel for the coach that says, hey, my wife and I have to do a bake sale just to afford uniforms. I understand that. I've been in the same situation where, we had a cookie drive in high school. I've been in college settings where that kids are missing meals because they're not on scholarship, and a lot of it is volunteerism in terms of participation. Yeah. So it's I feel bad. The free stuff usually gets to 90% perfect, and they always say, well, that last 10% will find a way to upload the data later. It doesn't work that way.
Well, nobody ever does. It's kind of like you sit on a pile of stuff and it's like, we'll get to it, and then next year comes and you got to get back into it again, and you forget about this pile of data that's sitting back there. But you're in a ton of. I'm handing this over to Ethan. You're always in a ton of a middle conversation on Twitter about anything that's going on, right? Like, let's just stick to this subject and talk about athlete monitoring and actually doing it in a practical and in an applied way. The
Derek will chime in whenever.
Derek wants to whenever
he seems necessary.
I just can't believe you compared yourself to Michelangelo.
No. Yeah, that's a good point. You remember, this is live and unscripted, and so anything that comes out, unfortunately, especially with Periscope, there's no filter. So, unlike some of the, there's no redo. So, for those listening, I'm not saying that I am Michelangelo. Far from it. That's probably why I'm here now talking about surveys and wellness questionnaires.
Paint the ceiling.
Well, so you're in the middle of. Somebody said it best. They said Carl Valle makes you think, right? Like you don't bullshit and ask the question for the sake of asking the question and calling people out. You actually ask the question because you're curious and you want to know and you want to see what's out there.
Yeah.
And with all the things that are thrown at you on this subject, you get to do surveys and things like that on a micro basis.
Yeah.
You get to see that scenario happen and work really well, and we get to see it on a research basis. What have you seen that really works? We got 150 people walking out of the room going, now what?
Yeah.
What do you see, and what have you seen that actually really works on a scalable level when I've got that 1 to 500 or that 1 to 300 ratio?
So that's a lot of the stuff I look at right now is the N of 1, the team, which is between, like you said, with a basketball team, anywhere between 15 and maybe 50. Mm-hmm. And then we have like the enterprise mode, which is, if you deal with large high schools that have JV and freshman squads, you're dealing with hundreds, a large college, hundreds, and then, so even an academy, some of these larger academies that are in Europe, you're dealing with satellite locations. Mm-hmm. So what works is starting off is speed.
Okay.
How, the first thing I ask is, how long does it take to do? And from there, you want something that's more agile, that's going to give you as much data with.
So if I've got 150 kids coming in, a 90-second time period for each of those kids, way too long.
Yeah, I mean, what is the bottleneck? So when you look at doing any type of, quote, monitoring, and I'm going to get into modeling later, is I always ask, what's their workflow, the kid's daily life? And Randy did a wonderful job showing, the time that you ask the questions, you're going to get little information. Mm-hmm. So I came up with a time pyramid, which is a way to say, hey, how do you use 24 hours? Mm-hmm. Sleep, everyone's talking about it. We'll use the mythical 8 hours because everyone's getting all this sleep because it's not a problem. And then you have, in a high school situation, then you have 6 hours that you must physically attend school, right? And then you have study, which is the third S. That's between 3 and 4 hours. Mm-hmm. Sport, 2 to 3 hours, right? And then I have social, which is, kids playing Call of Duty with their friends, and that's about an hour.
Sure.
Now, how you organize that, there's drive times and other stuff, that should add up to 24 hours. The most important way for coaches to really understand someone's life is to create a calendar longitudinally, and then what their daily grind is when they wake up to go to sleep, so they can say, hey, when is my opportunity to get information?
Things in. Right. So, but I think it's a great point, because everybody thinks, well, the time starts the minute you walk in the gym, the minute you're out of the gym. We hope you stay on your diet. Good luck. See you tomorrow. But you're saying sprinkle it in.
Yeah, I mean, there's no rules. That's the first rule. Monitoring is very who's doing what. Let me copy them. It's very top down. If this elite club is doing this, then it's going to somehow trickle down, especially the people that are winning. So right? I mean, it's like as Derek said, whoever wins the national title, that year's strength program is going to be used on every single high school program there.
And it was a great point too, because Joe Ken wins the NFL Strength Coach of the Year award at the NFL Strength Coach dinner, and Howard Nash, gets let go. Yeah. And it's because Carolina performed, exceedingly well. It had nothing to do with the talent; it all had to do with the coaching. Or and I mean that's the
it's a perception.
Yeah, that's perception. Right. Yeah. Now, I mean, Ken's a great coach, right? Yeah. Powerhouse. He's awesome. But is he strength coach of the year, or is the talent around him? Are the W's tied to what we guys are doing here, or do you have to find another metric that actually shows that you're successful? So, when you're trying to weight the value of what you're doing and sprinkling these things in, again, let's go back, applied. How do you sprinkle in the right stuff that, forget the winners of the Stanley Cup and forget the champions of this and that, like what have you actually seen in a true working environment that you just go, yeah, man, that's it, that really works well?
So as we overlap a lot of clients, and we work with teams, and I work with a handful of consultants that do work with teams. Yeah. And the first thing I look at it is when you're using and leverage something as simple as and elegant as the smartphone, it's a service industry. Mm-hmm. An athlete, I was on the plane, and what we're comfortable with is that you press the light if you need some help. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's a perspective. A lot of coaches say, hey, the athlete's not willing to do this. We have a problem with compliance. I said, you know what? If it was a concierge service, right? The difference between Big Brother and a guardian angel is all about how you create a perspective. So when I work with my athletes, they feel like, wow, here's a guy he's organized. He can call a massage therapist. I can input. There's SMS messaging. There's alert systems. Mm-hmm. They feel like there's someone there for them. Okay. So it's the attitude. If you're worried that you can't get data from people, guess what? You're not going to get data from them. They're going to smell it. The athletes always smell it.
It sounds like you're telling me that the first step should always be some sort of communication platform, whether it be text message, email, phone call.
Yeah, and we all know that the smart device, the smartphone is probably the easiest way to do so. Yeah. I think you got to rotate. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, we're going to grab some food at whatever hot lunch place, and then do the face-to-face time. I think you got to match a little bit of the human element, so that you're not just, staying in there playing Pokemon. Yeah. But I also feel that there isn't a way that technology is about efficiency. That's why it's beautiful, and I think that the technology gets a bad rep because, it's amazing. People are saying, well, this guy's a keyboard warrior, and they're tweeting this on their smartphone. I'm like, okay, you just called someone a keyboard warrior, using, the irony is so thick you can choke on it, using a mobile device, and obviously a touch screen.
But that mindset flips all this on its head, because everybody's data first, right? Everything that we're talking about here is data first, and we're capturing information, we're going to track information, we're going to use it, and all this other stuff. But everybody kind of skips past that part.
Everyone rushes in.
Yeah, that part of I got to be able to talk to my guy first.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue, is if I was to take a pool of money that a team is working with, the first thing I would do is to say, okay, what do you know you can do? What's your knowledge? what are you trying to do, and then what are you getting done? And each gap represents probably an area where culture. And I always say this, and Laden Jovanovic just posted it, I don't know, like a year ago. It's not what you know, it's what you can get your athletes to do.
Right.
So many people ask me, well, how'd you get involved with coaching when what'd you do for a sport? I did swimming and track, and it's a tale of two cities. I had an amazing set of coaches in swimming, and I had some really well-intended coaches in track. Got injured in track repeatedly. Swimming, obviously we won 3 state titles. So I think it's the attitude towards things. And the first thing you got to do is say, hey, what's it like to be an athlete?
Yeah.
And I say this with wellness questionnaires all the time. I said, do you do wellness questionnaires if you're like a lawyer? Could you imagine a lawyer waking up and getting really boring questions or a survey that's excessively long? User experience. So the most important rule with data collection is athlete user experience.
Yep.
When you get you're evaluating, you see people looking at brain and heart, and there's they're pulling patches off and hair's coming off and, things like that. What's it like to do that?
Yeah.
Even the guys like in myself, I actually use the equipment on myself first and say, hey, here's a guy that lives with this stuff. On Indiegogo, I'm probably, dropping tons of money, or whatever. I don't even like to do this. There's no way someone that's not engaged is going to do that. So I think what we need to do, and Doug talked about the bell curve.
Yeah.
A bell curve, you're going to have majority of the athletes are going to be like, hey, I'll do it if it's, low friction. Then you're going to have the people that are like, you got to put their face on a milk carton to do anything. Where are they? Wow, the guy took a shower in his portable, his limo. He doesn't even want to go into the weight room. Then you're going to have the guys, and sometimes they're on the bench, are willing to do anything to get better. So I focus my energies actually on the divas, because if I can succeed there, everything else is super easy. What most people do is they try to aim in the middle,
Yep.
which is okay to do if you want to get some success. But if you can really do an amazing job convincing, selling, pleading to get data, even if it's a little bit of passive methods, a video camera, whatever, you can go and get a lot of information without having that friction. And I think that's what people need to think about, is how to make the experience better for the athlete versus how to convince people, right?
So if we're making the experience better for the athlete, and we go back, you mentioned wellness questionnaires. I think it's a good common theme that comes up over and over again, session RPEs and wellness questionnaires, because it can be done without a budget. I can't afford Coach Me Plus, Smarter Base, Conduct, Team Builder, whatever is out there. There's, athlete monitoring, whatever it might be. What can I use?
Obviously there's, if you look at the free products, the Google products, and be careful what you ask for. Like a lot of people say, oh, wow, Carl, like you're customizing stuff. And no, this is also a hobby. So not only do I have it as a profession, it just doesn't stop. And if anyone knows me, they know it's like, okay, it's 8 p.m., you're still, you're soldering something. Yeah. For me, it's my passion, and I'm happy. But I think if you want to start off, you start with the Google products. Okay? And that's the easiest thing to say, okay, can you do a simple survey, 5 questions, 1 through 10, whatever. Okay? And just doing that is a way to say, okay, maybe you leave a little bit of a bubble. And I think that sometimes the surveys, when you're only answering questions and you're not letting the athlete express themselves, I don't need to see a haiku poem, but what you want to do is to say, okay, what if you took all the little few sentences that they put in? That's fascinating. A strength coach with the Kansas City Chiefs, his name is Ryan Reynolds. He's not the actor. I always say Ryan Reynolds. And then some of the women from they're walking by and their ears pick up and perk up, but he's a guy that worked with the national champion softball team when he was with Arizona State.
Yep.
And he had a very nice rudimentary solution it was analog, pen and paper. And what was so beautiful is that they had a heavy training session. I don't know if it was because the coach was having a double or something like that. Instead of filling in 1 through 10, they wrote their own little scale. They, said like 15. And so that ability...
But back to scalability and actually monitoring your data over time, that's not scalable, right? Like,
okay, true. But that was a design issue versus what type of modality you're using. So what we've learned from that is sometimes it wasn't necessarily that it was pen and paper. It was just the fact that there was a way for pen and paper to express by writing on top of it versus a little, like a dialogue box where you can go and just put in a handful of sentences. And so sometimes just having to say free expression, let the athlete drive a little part of the process versus this, this cold, big blue, old 1984 ad, where it just everyone feels that they have to do the same thing. Yeah. So I think that's a great way for people to express themselves, and that's what athletes do, artistically in sport. Just having it 1 through 10, it gets monotonous. What do you do in 3 weeks? They get bored.
Interesting.
But do you think there should be some sort of intervention, even if it is some sort of, I'm not going to say made up intervention, but to show that there's some efficacy?
Okay, so that.
Derek.
Oh, Derek, yeah. Come in, and then that's a good question.
Introduce yourself real quick to the laptop. Nobody cares what's going on.
Hi, I'm Derek.
Okay, just so you know, Derek Hansen and I have known each other for over a decade.
For better, for worse.
For better, for worse. Mostly on the better. So obviously both speed and power coaches. He's got some of the same mentors and influencers. Al Vermeil, Coach Francis, some of the great people that are out there. So the question, let's just repeat that, is like, okay, you got to give feedback to the athlete, like, hey, thank you for giving me the information, right? So I have a 3-to-1 ratio concept. If an athlete gives me something, this day and age of entitlement, I try to give 3 back. And you can say, well, you're kind of feeding into the problem. Well, for me, I think it just starts off with just making sure that thank you for doing this, right? And maybe giving them something a little bit more personalized, like an SMS message with the nickname. Say, hey, so they know it's not this robot on the other side or this algorithm. They know it's me. The second part is like, here's what I'm going to do differently if necessary. Yep. Or tell them like, hey, I got your information. It's okay that we're training heavy. This is the beginning of the GPP. I'm not going to react to this. Because the biggest problem I see with a lot of these teams, they do all these surveys, right? And the guy's like, oh, my hamstrings are bleeding. I'm murdered. I'm tired. I can't sleep, right? And they pour their heart and soul for a couple weeks. Then what happens on the field, the team coach is like, we need to build fourth quarter endurance. This is whatever. You insert the name of the university pride. Everyone has their own pride because apparently no other college team has pride. So they have the hills, the team, like the Navy SEAL puking. And they say, and then the athlete, and I've been there too. Hey, I just told you that I have a shoulder problem from doing, we did 10,000 meters. I was on a swim club, and I just told you that before practice. Yet you put me in the lane that's, like the endurance lane to get me more volume. I'm like, it's not making sense. Same thing with the GPS. It doesn't matter that you're collecting all this stuff, and you're the guy literally sitting next to the team coach. And he's like, hey, I just told you all this information. You're right next to the guy. Can you tell him that we're kind of going hard? And so I think that's what they need to know is that, yes, we are listening. And it's hard when you're only intaking data.
Well, I think that's what's happening with GPS, too. You're strapping a hockey puck to your chest, and you're going, okay, where is this going? And the practice doesn't change. The volumes don't change. The intensities don't change. And so you go, why am I doing this? And then you do the Happy Gilmore and throw it across the field, right? So,
but isn't that? I mean, that's always the promise of the intervention with GPS. I always talk about that. It's not the data; it's the intervention. But the intervention with GPS is modifying your next session based on the information, or using the GPS information to actually plan your sessions. What would you say? Just gut call the percentage of coaches that are actually doing that the right way, as opposed to just looking at like top end speed and odometer.
Oh. 0 comes to mind, but there's people that'll tell you they're doing it, and then but I don't know if they're just justifying their position or the communication is being made, this one-way communication of hey, we're in the red, or our loads are high, but is there a systemic effort to change things organization-wide from the top down to make sure that they're complying to those recommendations. I don't think so.
So you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think a lot of the issue that I've seen is our culture with sport is, at the end of the day, the head coach is the one that makes the final decision, not the preparation coach. So you're going back to putting in some sort of modification to the program based on the data you've collected. But in colleges, NFLs, even in the NBA, a lot of that doesn't happen because the head coach is still the guy that's making the call. I mean,
okay, so I'll respond to that. Take, in the winter meetings or at the NFL Combine, let's say you have 30 head coaches, right? Where's the whiteboards and say, okay, what's your weekly setup as a team coach, and how do you look at the information that you're getting from your strength coach?
When you get to that competitive level, though,
nobody's saying that in front of 30 people.
I understand that. No one's going to say, I'm going to share my secret sauce.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But let's say you do it internally. And then there's it was a hypothetical question. Could you see it happen internally? Do they take their coordinators and say, hey, here's our winning model for the Albuquerque Rough Riders, You're not going to see that. You're not going to see okay, whoever, love to, Bill Walsh has passed away, obviously. And I would love to say, okay, Bill, if Bill Walsh had the technology now, right, and he came from Al Vermeil, influenced, and obviously Dick Vermeil, that whole connection, what would they do and say in terms of, would they leave a little gas for the strength coach on Wednesday, say, you know what, I know your strength coaches are worried about getting enough gas in your tank for the weight room. We're going to cut off by 30 minutes and only do certain patterns or type of strategies. I have not seen that. I think that San Antonio, if you look at someone that understands that, I think there's a lot of intuitive coaches that understand work. The Finding the Winning Edge by Bill Walsh, he talked about fatigue, and says you're doing too much. Now, an easy, convenient metric is minutes. But you can see how bad people are messing up minutes. We all saw what happened with Kobe, right? Everyone saw it a mile away. Even the sports writers are like, hey, they're using the same terminologies that you'd hear with a strength and conditioning coach. Volume, density of schedule, travel. And then what happened? Achilles rupture. So I think that, and then we saw what happened. He couldn't get back. Humpty Dumpty couldn't get back again. Now, he had a great ending with his last game, right? That's great, but he still got 5 rings and Jordan has 6. If things were different, what would the Lakers be if they had a situation where Dwight Howard, right, and obviously with Steve Nash, if those guys are all healthy? Not to say that would have worked. I'm just saying, what if?
So then between, the 3 of you guys,
yeah.
Just quick hit, what would you say is missing in the gap between the promise of what this information is supposed to tell us and the actual usage of that information, Ethan?
Well, the big thing is the coach. The big thing is the head coach did not bring in the technology in any case.
It has to start from the top.
Yeah,
no doubt.
So if it comes from somebody else and they impose it on them, it's not going to work.
And I think that's been part of what's happened with GPS is it's either Team X got it, so we have to get it because Team X got it, or it's the strength coach saying, Team X got it, and we got to have it.
We're going to catch up.
We got to catch up.
Arms race.
Yeah, we got to catch up, and the next thing you know, coach is getting all these reports, and the coach is like, I don't care, we're still winning games. Yeah. And that's the hard part, too, is there are a lot of teams that are very successful, and they're successful because they have great talent. There's still, you can be the best prepared team on the field, or the court or whatever, but if that other team is more talented than you, the chances of you winning, I don't know, maybe 1 out of 10? I don't know.
You? Quick hit?
I think I'm just going to repeat what Derek said. And I'm still waiting for that infographic or that really succinct summary to say, hey, this is what you need to do, head coach. And that's why, I always talk about modeling. What does it look like in a weekly setup so they can understand the technical, tactical things and handling a body in terms of recovery and the training needs of what got them great. Everyone drafts people from the combine, but they never ask there's no sophomore combine, year 1 or year 2 in the right? Wouldn't you want to see that data all the time? And it's amazing. I write for Simply Faster, and you'd be amazed. Very few people time, because it's such a pure, measurable way. And yeah, the context is different than the combine. But I think that's the issue, is that the coaches, no one wants to educate the coaches, and Randy talked about that.
Yep.
Very few, coaches that are in the leagues come from, like, they have where's the NFL level 4, sports physiology course? You have this a little bit with other sports, and you see a lot more integration, and we're going to see more of that, I think, but it's too slow. It's so slow, it's glacier speed.
And not to be a homer, but that's what Meg Stone and a lot of those folks down there talk about, is just trying to bring up our coaches in this country up to speed with education on training and some basic understanding of physiology.
So who educates the coaches? Like, whose job is it to educate the coach? Is it the company selling the GPS product or the monitoring system? Is it the industry who is come up with the USAW certification level 1 for weightlifting? Why not the same thing for technology? I think Exos is actually trying to do something like that right now. EXOS.
Yeah.
So many Exos out there. So who's responsible for the education of the industry? Because I'll tell you what, I mean, if anyone in this room had access to that technology, and all three of you know how to apply it and actually get the right value out of it, but you guys are also on the top, percentage of people who actually use this stuff. So for everybody else, who's going to show them, by the way, the best way to use this is to plan your Tuesday practice and your Wednesday practice and so on.
Somebody who
and so
doesn't
on.
care about getting fired. Yeah, I mean, it's got to come from them, right? It's really got to come from them. And
the hardware company or the...
No, the coach or the head coach. Like, I mean, it's nice to be able to say, like, we're going to educate the head coaches, but, I mean, it's all natural selection, right? It's that they got the job because somebody thought they were good, or
Sure.
But it's not because they've gone through a process of education by any means. It's a process of succession, right? Like, oh, you coached with him, so he was good. So
the North American coaching tree. The great North American coaching tree.
So
also the inbreeding tree, because if you think about it, that coaching tree is usually like minds. Yeah. And that's not what you want. I mean, you obviously want to draw the intelligent, you're not going to have wishbone, NFL teams anytime soon. But I think there needs to be, everything's secret too, So I think a sensible idea is that someone that's going to be a voice of reason. I think it's going to have like either some sort of like federation or some sort of way per sport. I mean, no one's going to be, like for example, baseball, America's pastime. You're not going to see a Eastern Bloc manual on baseball performance. It just doesn't. There's a cultural gap that would be there.
Well, let's leapfrog a little bit. So we're stuck at the high elite level with a gap in education on actually what to do with the technology. Mm-hmm. One of your questions here, and that came in from Twitter. What are the problems with technology at the consumer to the high school and the college to the pro side? If the promise of these companies, we take a look at what Catapult just did with their acquisition of Player Tech. If the promise of these companies is to eventually get to the prosumer market and potentially the consumer market, the regular consumer market, they're going to have to educate these people on why they're buying this and why they're purchasing this. So do they kind of like skip right over the pro teams and then start educating the general public on why it's important, and through that maybe the pro teams learn?
Yeah, I think a good company to learn from is actually Training Peaks, because there's a combination of the average person can go trial it, and it's catered towards triathletes, and it's a diverse amount of hardware. So the consumer accountability, it's like almost like crowdsourcing, forces an evolution to accelerate. That's one thing to think about. I also think that the more people are, and this is with social media, it's the strength. More people that are voicing their opinion in a healthy manner, whether it be, frequently asked questions and there's already some light education, it's going to naturally stir up the pot. So what we're trying to do with all of these, with Player Tech, for example, you have a device that is, 300 pounds. I look at the website, euros or something. I'm not sure what their price point is.
Brexit, who knows what.
yeah. But with that price point, it allows a high school kid to say, "I'm going to bring your own device." I think my coach is making us do a lot of work, and that creates a natural measurement to say, "Mom, Dad, I don't want helicopter parents, but there needs to be some transparency."
But now you're leapfrogging the pro teams. You're breaking it wide open, and you're telling the consumer this is the best way to use this stuff.
I think there's a combination where, and this is where the quantified self movement is, that it's very bottom up. Hackers, the first thing they do is they get the piece of equipment and see what they can do with it. So you want to have a combination. You want to have a vision of someone that, with a vision of someone that has that talent of Steve Jobs. You're not going to have a huge crowd that as talented as that man was. So you want to have the vision from top, but you also want to have the crowd give some natural checks and balances. And, to say, hey, this is, like for example, the joke about, and Ryan Horn was showing the pictures of his Catapult custom shirts. That took years for a company to say, hey, the bro is not something that, is not very popular with athletes. The man's ear. And it's because there was just not enough users. Catapult, while they might have a huge saturation in the pros, it's still, compared to like a Fitbit, doesn't have the pain because they almost had a monopoly for a while.
So, a company like Whoop, when we were talking about those guys before we started here, appears to be trying to get the athlete buy-in first. A company like Zephyr, when they work with Major League Baseball, the pitchers can wear the devices in game, but it's their data first.
Sure.
So do you see this? Do you see a trend where this is going to again flip on its head, and these companies begin to work with the prosumer or the educated athlete first, because the teams haven't been acting on the information? Or do you?
I'll give you a very personal side. Look at InsideTracker. Mm-hmm. InsideTracker. When I first saw them, I remember as a coach the suffering that it took just to get a simple blood test for vitamin D. Mm-hmm. And this is the late 90s. And then, 2010, 2011, they came aboard, and it's an individual athlete that's just curious. He talks to the sports scientist, and he has a little bit of a curiosity, could go on his phone, and with white glove service, like an Uber coming to your to your house or whatever you are, you can get a prosumer experience. You're getting the very effective, thousands and thousands of clients to shape a product, but then you have the high level quality. We're seeing that all the time now. You have agents that are trying to make sure that they're protecting their assets. You have the individual athlete that says, I don't trust anyone. I just need to make sure I can control my own destiny. And they say, well, what if I was with this team? It's amazing. Social media. I saw a Twitter tweet of a private handbook on nutrition from a soccer athlete, and it was like, you can tell there's the logo and the coach. Sure. They're saying, hey, do you believe in this? So there's a community, an underground, almost like some sort of. Yeah, an underground community where the athletes are talking and saying, hey, what do you believe about this?
Well, think about all the retirements that have happened by guys who have, potential CTE issues or guys who, just quit. And then they still have, a lot of career left based on what, guys have done in the past. So you have Marshawn Lynch, you have the receiver at Detroit.
Calvin Johnson.
Yeah. So these guys are quitting, and people are like, hey, these guys still have a career. But I think education has taught them, like, your bodies can't take it, your brains can't take it, and they've made that assessment themselves rather than being dictated by the convention of the league.
So then if I'm a pro athlete and I'm looking to protect my own interests,
yes,
what choices do I have besides consumer products? I mean, like where can I actually step up and do something? What leverage do I have to actually do this?
Yeah, well, they have money. That's the first thing is.
But I can't buy a 1-unit catapult system. I can't buy a 1-unit whoop system. I can't buy a 1-unit fatigue science system. I can't buy.
That's what we think we know, and a lot of times you can say, okay, for example, the Suunto Ambit watch, right? I have athletes that are just casually wearing the watch, and that is a GPS tool. And you can see the heat maps, the data. It's not 99% of the more enterprise products, but it's pretty darn close to what the data that you can get.
Yeah.
So there's a point. Now it's not like James Bond where every athlete has Q, but a lot of athletes like that. They like the fact that they get stuff that no one else has. I was talking to the guys from Fatigue Science. And the fact that you can go and get a Jawbone or a Fitbit, that's interesting to an athlete. But if you have something that's exclusive for only elite athletes, that's very intriguing.
I mean, look at I watched the Wimbledon finals, and Serena Williams has a commercial with IBM Watson, and you can go onto IBM Watson website right now and have your own Watson site that you can upload your own CSV data into. And I think that just reaffirms what you're saying is athletes are the informed self. They're interested in, like you were bringing up with Calvin Johnson. You said you had money, but he also probably did his own Googling, and probably he sought out his own advice through Google or his own medical staff or his own doctor, and probably did his own research because they're going to make their own decisions that they think is best for them.
Well, how dangerous does this get when 10 years ago I walk into my high school coach or my college coach or even my pro coach, I'm like, hey man, I read in Men's Health that blah 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 blah, I should be doing this workout for my buff arms. Well, now you take that to a deeper level. Hey, I wore this $9.99 wearable device that's telling me that you're working me too hard. Like where does that begin to like?
Well, okay, so that we experience that. What happens when you have the private coach whispering in the ear of the elite athlete?
Yeah, you guys face that
right.
A lot.
You have the athlete said, okay, I had a former strength coach that I really liked in college, right? That I liked what he did, but he's not available to help. You have obviously the one assistant and a head strength coach with the team now that might have different opinions. There's a little bit of a power struggle internally. I think it's okay. It's naturally going to happen, but that's going to force people to address what I consider the biggest elephant in the room is, everyone's worried about self-preservation. And, all these leadership books that we see on social media, you see everything. You just go to any Barnes Noble and you see like a coach that is, very famous and then he has like the winning edge, And I'm guilty of this. You pick it up and saying, what is Phil Jackson doing? Well, it's nice to have Kobe, Shaq, and MJ.
Yeah.
But on the other hand is like, okay, what can we learn from a guy that's dealing with some amazing athletes and managing them? So I think we don't know what the answer is, but I do like the fact that I'd rather have people talking about training and having an agreement issue. You're going to have that regardless. You had that way before the internet. In the 1980s, an athlete's training at a training camp in Italy. They see the other group of sprinters doing certain exercises. How come we're not doing that? Well, maybe because you only have 2 years of development and they have 5 years. Or, hey, all those guys never make the finals because they blow out their backs doing something that might be a risk. So I think it's good that people are talking. It's just, I think the real issue is people are not talking.
That I would agree with. I would totally agree with. Like you said, we get back to the things are being told in secret behind the scenes and not actually sharing information. And there would be an amazing amount of teams that we would sit down with, and we're simply a data. Derek, thanks. I know you got it right.
I gotta handle my own self-preservation. You guys keep talking about monitoring.
He's actually doing the intervention. His wellness questionnaire says, "Have you fueled lately?"
My blood sugar is low.
Yeah.
Do you feel your blood sugar crash?
Well, I actually came prepared with thanks to your power bar or whatever, your builder bar. Well, I think we're wrapping up and probably going to question 2. I think that's
Question 2.
yeah.
It's 50 minutes in, and we're at question 2.
But it's a little easier now because it's like, obviously with Derek always adds a great perspective and usually very blunt. But I think it,
Well, we need more of that, and so many people are afraid to break the shell and talk about things. It's like making the omelet, you got to break the eggs. So many people are afraid to say that either in settings like this where you're actually up on stage, social media where then you get branded as you are an A guy, B guy, or a C guy.
Yeah.
And you simply just want to have the here, you do it, I don't know what your thing is. You just simply want to have the conversation, and people are afraid to ask the questions, and like Derek said, because you might get fired. I just don't see an answer to.
Well, the conference is just one of the answers.
They are for having the social events and everything else like that, and hanging around afterwards. But during the conference, when the guy's on stage, people aren't really
rare. But again, if you don't have a way for someone to create a gathering, and someone brought it up. Finally, someone spoke up after years of saying what everyone's thinking.
Yeah. Randy
broke the ice, and that's what we need to do more of. And I think it's because of guys like Jay who are facilitating this, and that's. No, I think I think the trend is going to be better in BSMPG, for example. Merging.
Really missed that this year.
Literally merging sports medicine and strength and conditioning.
Yep.
And that I can't blame Art. He's there. He's just had a kid. But I think those are the things that create a way for people to talk.
So Ethan, you mentioned personal Watson websites, which gets us into the next question we have on here. Why modeling is the future, and what does it mean? Modeling, and
I knew you were gonna look at me.
And this could be a 2-hour podcast all on its own. So let's just set the stage in the difference between modeling and monitoring.
Yeah.
Monitoring being, just tracking the information, and modeling being using the information in an informative way. So, because we can get into, if you're using questionnaires, if you're using this, if you're using data.
Yeah, I
so let's
stay away from that.
in the pure sense, if somebody's listening to this for the first time and they hear the word modeling or predictive analytics or machine learning algorithm or something like this that really sounds sci-fi and techie and whiz-bangy and everything else like
artificial intelligence.
Yeah, let's get past
neural networks.
Let's get past all the BS and actually talk about what's real and what's applicable.
So I think that's important. You say what is real and what's applicable, and I'm going to say that again. What is real? What are people really doing?
Yeah.
And then what's something that you can actually do in a setting that's chaotic? I hate when people start talking about neural networks in these roundtable discussions, because I always ask, and I have the ultimate metric for athletes that aren't fitting the perfect model, if you will, which is what time in the morning are they driving, at what speed, with what blood alcohol level, right? Where did the sleep education work out, right? Where did all the predictive analytics? Did you actually have like a giant safety cushion so they wouldn't crash? Come on. So I think it's really damaging. The reason we're not making progress is because there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. Underneath the hood, you hear all these startups, and they're saying we have, the typical term, and I use it all the time, the analytic engine. And it's really easy to say you have this magical back end. Mm-hmm. And I think when people think about modeling, and I don't want to bastardize the term, but it's usually a composite of measuring things and having a plan. Mm-hmm. So periodization, fancy word for a glorified calendar.
Workout schedule.
A calendar, a plan. And then monitoring is just measuring things and observing.
Yep.
So the issue I'm seeing with monitoring is that it became a reactive world where we're waiting for the sky to fall. We're waiting for someone to always get tired. Yeah, we understand people get tired. So I think modeling is more of a positive term in saying, hey, we're going to manage these variables, we're going to take these inputs, and we're going to have better decision making that we've already kind of scoped out. We know that people are going to get tired in the playoffs. We know that attrition happens in football where you're going to have to get people off the practice squad. We know that when a guy has an ACL tear, it's going to be tough getting him back by a certain time, and maybe it makes sense to do some trades. I think we're going to see more of that, and modeling is this, don't be scared by it. A lot of strength coaches, especially at the lower levels, become paranoid when they see some sort of pop culture book, and it's always something that has nothing to do with sports, but it's like an expert.
It's a business book.
It's always the further away the expert is, the more of an expert they are.
Yeah.
The further
chef, I can tell you, he's got this whole system.
Yes. So for example, I like outside the box learning.
Yeah.
I forget the name. It's like Yuri Dreams of Sushi.
Yep.
Which is a great thing, and it's like craftsmanship. It's great. But then you have people will spend a year promoting this idea, anti-fragile.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you know what? I like the idea. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Yep. It's hundreds of years older than that, And you can let's not try to reinvent the wheel. Let's not try to sexify things. Let's not try to pretend we're smart.
Yep.
Let's deal with the real core issues. So I think modeling. I think we should move on. I mean, that's just enough to get people's appetites wet.
So what if I'm again? I'm the coach who's listening to this for the first time. I've heard all these cool words. I know that they're techie and interesting, and maybe even my statistics class I was interested in for a little while. What can I do in a practical, real use application to begin my first modeling experiment? Like, I want to take a look at two different data, or find two different data points that actually correlate to each other.
I think the easiest thing for a strength coach to look at is strength and conditioning, old school. One conditioning metric that is very easy to capture, very valid, and then balance it off with so it's simple. Conditioning and strength. Find a strength or power type indice. Find a conditioning variable that you can you might not have to test it, but you can kind of track some things. And I think just say, do these inputs matter? Body composition, right? I have a really good friend that says fat doesn't fly, right? And so what he does, and this is for body types, his father was at a racetrack, loved horse racing, and I love anything with a stopwatch. So I love the horses. But he said I could look and say this person probably has a chance to run fast because they're lean. So I think you got to take a couple data points and say what's it worth. You see these guys with $150,000 to $200,000 worth of vibration platforms, and what person says, okay, this vibration platform is worth 1/10 in the 40? No, what's it worth? So that's what I think people should do, is to take two really crude metrics and say, how do these things carry over throughout the season? And then see, can you sustain it? Can you just check on it?
And that's where we get back to the applied side of it, because so much of this is like, well, it's big data, we need a lot more information, we need to test all these things and so on, where it's like, well, look, you can get started with, as you're saying, two metrics that actually turn into some value, and then begin to test your different conditions and your inputs to actually find out whether or not there's an effect to those, right?
So one of my favorite coaches that I've coached with, and he was the head coach I was with him for 2 years, and I was the assistant, and I just kind of was there for the ride. And this was, 5 years ago. And Coach Tommy, we did the very basic program, and all I did was measure someone's smile. Because if you deal with sprinters, sometimes the personalities in any athlete, talented people sometimes have, a little bit of baggage. And so all I did is measure how many times did the person smile, how many times did she get a big smile, and I just rated it 1 through 5. This is when I was experimenting with facial coding. And I said, I can guarantee that his program is going to elicit a really good response. I was shocked. I said, you know what? It's working, and I wouldn't do what he's doing. And she became an All-American, set the record, and it was amazing. And I think people need to have something that they believe in, and then to say, hey, does it actually correlate? Now, causation does not mean correlation, but at least have something that's an early warning system, or something that says, hey, something's jiving here.
Don't we always talk about this at the office? That one book that's like all the correlations between two different data points that have nothing.
Mean nothing.
Like, the government domestic.
Like a number of, like
ice cream and crimes or something like that. Yeah.
Jeez, I'm glad you guys are here because I completely screwed that up. But
yeah. It's usually crime because as the summer comes up, there's more youth out and up to no good.
But the fun part about this is that everybody's talking about these, building these systems into these software packages and platforms, and even I don't know, just even like a wellness questionnaire is going to have predictive modeling into it and built into it and stuff like that.
He talks about modeling. I think, to me, you're talking about if just finding a relationship, not necessarily building some artificial neural network or some logistic regression. I mean, if we had that ability, there's a lot of smart people in this industry that would have already done it, in my opinion. So to me, when you talk about modeling, it's like, back in the day, people with longer arms do less pull-ups than people with shorter arms. It's something like that. It's, can we measure two things and do they relate to each other? Not necessarily building some ginormous machine learning algorithm in R. That to me is what you're talking about with modeling. In my opinion,
and that's why I wanted to clear this up, because I think a lot of people take a look at what Twitter is such a small, micro. You can only fit so many characters. You throw a thing out there. There's no emotional context. You got to explain yourself, and it just evaporates so quickly, and people just hang on one tweet. When you say modeling, they just go, machine learning. Machine learning, and I've seen insurance modeling system, and there's thousands of inputs and hundreds of variables.
Big data,
gigantic
cloud.
data. We can't do that in this field because we don't have enough information. We don't have enough data.
I just sent Kevin an article yesterday that was it Athena Health? No, Google Health is mining 1 million images a day to catch eye diseases earlier. That is big data. That's unstructured big data. Having 50,000 rows by 150 fields isn't big data.
But you can get to basic modeling if you're looking at a single variable and then looking at what inputs affect it.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest modeling that you could think of is, are you maxing out TRIMP? Everyone's moved on to everything else since it's been around for a long time. I mean, Polar is not like it's a startup, and people have to realize they keep moving to the next big thing, so they don't understand modeling because they don't get, their foundations isn't historical. So there's no history with sports technology. People think, 3 years ago it started. I'm like, no, technology starts when Grog the caveman scratched on a bone to keep attendance, So I think that with modeling, the sports that you can learn from, it starts with the most basic. Cycling is really strong there. Obviously, there's a doping issue. But that's the final number. But they're still training. They're still trying to get better. So there's still a lot to learn from, even from any sport. At the high level, there is drugs, and it adds another variable. But we kind of know what the drugs are. We know what they do. So it just only augments the scores. Formula One. I hate going to these huge sports analytics conferences because you see this typical recipe. You have a general manager from a random team. You have a coach who's retired, is on a speaking circuit, and they always bring in Formula One. And Formula One, first of all, I'm a huge fan. Everyone knows that. And you can learn a lot from that. But what's happening is you're getting people that are on the proxy that sometimes are speaking, and they're not doing it justice. Now, on the other side, Red Bull. They spoke at the FLIR conference in Nashville last year, and I was like, finally, someone's showing the bridge of applied sciences. And I think that's what we need to see more of, is okay, cross-pollination, but not trying to be sexy, say, I'm learning from all these other fields. We tend to see that is where you can get, the books, the more outside the box you are, the more of a smart thinker you are. And I deal with a bunch of really shrewd coaches that are very old school. And I was at a conference in it was like a speed conference, it was NASE, and the guy was coaching longer than I've been alive, and he had so much wisdom because history trumps theory. And so when someone goes, I have all these ideas, I said, go to Wikipedia and work backwards. Who's winning and why? So I always say this. If you're looking at any information specifically on the Olympic level, just go to Wikipedia and see who's winning. Is there a pattern with coaches? Versus, hey, I have an idea. So that's kind of, I'm getting onto a rant. I promised I wouldn't do that because I was warned about it.
Yes, you're called the ranter.
Yeah. It's therapy.
Bob Alejo said that.
Yeah, and
Carl Valle, the ranter. But he cleaned it right up, and he goes, "No, man, like you ask the questions, and there's a lot of 144 character arguments out there, and some of it's constructive and some of it isn't. But I think it's one of the rare places that we can actually ask the real questions.
Yeah.
We got to wrap, or else we turn into a pumpkin. I think at midnight or over an hour, and that basically just starts cutting us off. So
let's go rapid fire.
Rapid fire, yes.
Yeah, I think that's the easiest thing to do. 1 minute drill.
Okay, number
2 minute drill for podcast.
Third question, and we're already an hour and a half in. What are we not measuring?
I think we're not measuring things like personality and sports psychology very well. Pat Davidson is a really bright guy. Maybe he should be putting on a podcast. Is that I don't think we understand sports psychology. It's strength and conditioning, then nutrition, and then really on the far outskirts is sports psychology in terms of what people value.
Sure.
So I think if you can do more there, I think we saw that ACE, questionnaire. I think we need more there. And the psychology, and it's a really hard area to make sure to vet that who's good and who's not. But I'll just leave it like that. We need to do more sports psychology.
Those are very rapid.
Good.
Big news this week. Catapult purchases a couple of companies, and one of them is PlayerTech. Who are they, and what does it mean for high school?
PlayerTech is a player tracking company that's in Ireland. I've been using their products for a while now because I wanted to brace myself not only for GPS and accelerometry, but I'm bracing myself for some of the IMU stuff. Yep. So that's what I'm seeing is that's a company that just got acquired, and I'm really excited that's going to help high school, and we're going to see a big Cambrian explosion.
Yeah, we're excited about it too. Number 5, what is the key to getting compliance with data?
Athlete user experience. Start with working with addictive behaviors and then throttling it down. That's it. Natasha Schul, is probably someone that you might want to think about, and that's how my perspective. Just throttle down addiction versus trying to move from the very bottom of the heap, which is trying to beg and plead.
Can you say that name again so we can look it up?
Natasha Schul. She's an MIT professor, writer. Yeah.
And what's in the future?
The future is going to be getting data from the eye, amazing organ system, and we're going to see more there. All right, that's it.
Great.
Okay, there's literally a security custodian.
Security throwing us out.
That's
awesome.
So we're good. All right.
Thanks, Carl. Thanks to Derek and, of course, Ethan. This podcast number 5, Coach Me Plus Applied Sports Science Podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you again for listening to the Coach Me Plus Applied Sports Science Podcast. Remember to sign up for the Coach Me Plus newsletter and hear every episode of the Applied Sports Science Podcast, as well as our Sports Science Minutes over at CoachMePlus.com.